Your masculinity is the relentless repudiation of the feminine. That's rule number one. Everything else is just an elaboration of that. Second rule, be a big wheel. We measure your masculinity by the size of your paycheck. Oh, I know what you were thinking. But you know, wealth, power, status. You ever see that bumper sticker, he who has the most toys when he dies wins? That's what I'm talking about. Third rule of masculinity, be a sturdy oak. What makes a man is that he's reliable in a crisis. What makes him reliable in a crisis is that he resembles an inanimate object. You know, a rock, a pillar. And the fourth rule, give him hell. Exude an aura of daring and aggression. Live life out on the edge. Take risk. Go for it. So those are the four basic rules of manhood. And what I'd like to do for a few minutes is take those four rules and match them up to those four areas of change in women's lives to suggest some of the kinds of issues I think we're facing on college campuses and in our country at large. Now remember, that first area of change in women's lives is women made gender visible. Now the problem here, I think, is that when I say women made gender visible, gender remains visible largely to women. When I say the word gender, what gender comes into your mind? Women. Most men don't know that gender is as important in our lives as women understand it is in theirs. I mean, if you teach a course called something like Psychology of Women, Sociology of Women, you get 95% women. Teach a course called Psychology of Gender, Sociology of Gender, you get 90% women. Most men don't think that gender is about them, and this is political. So let me talk a little bit about how I think this is political and why we need to do this. Let me tell you my own story about this, how I first became aware of some of these. 25 years ago, I was finishing my PhD, and I was teaching at a local university not far away from my graduate school. And you know how new faculty and graduate students get. We get new ideas come along, and we get, oh, this is so exciting, let's talk about them. And so one day we were sitting around, a bunch of my friends and I were sitting around and we said, there's an explosion of writing and thinking in feminist theory, but there's no courses yet. So we did what graduate students and new faculty typically do in that situation. We say, let's have a study group. We'll get together once a week, we'll read a text, we'll talk about it, we'll have a potluck. So each week, 11 women and me got together. We would read some text in feminist theory and talk about it. And during one of our meetings, I witnessed a conversation between two of the women that changed how I saw this forever. One of the women was white and one was black. The white woman said, now this is the part that's going to sound really 25 years old now. The white woman said, all women have the same experience as women. All women face the same oppression as women. All women are similarly situated in patriarchy. And therefore, she said, all women have a kind of intuitive solidarity or sisterhood. And the black woman said, I'm not so sure. Let me ask you a question. So the black woman says to the white woman, when you wake up in the morning and you look in the mirror, what do you see? And the white woman said, I see a woman. And the black woman said, you see, that's the problem. Because when I wake up in the morning and I look in the mirror, she said, I see a black woman. To me, race is visible. But to you, it's invisible. You don't see it. And then she said something really startling. She said, that's how privilege works. Privilege is invisible to those who have it. It is a luxury, I would say, to the white people sitting in this room not to have to think about race every split second of your life. That's what privilege is about. Privilege is invisible to those who have it. Now, you'll remember I was the only man in this group. So when I witnessed this, I kind of put my head in my hand and groaned, and oh no. Somebody said, well, what was that reaction? And I said, well, when I wake up in the morning and I look in the mirror, I see a human being. I'm kind of the generic person. You know, I'm a middle-class white man. I have no race, no class, no gender. I'm universally generalizable. So I like to think that was the moment I became a middle-class white man. That class and race and gender were not about other people, but they were about me. I had to think about them. And it had been privilege that had kept them invisible to me for such a long time. Now, I'd love to tell you that that's the end of this story. but I was reminded of it just last semester. I have a colleague at Stony Brook where I teach, and she and I both teach the sociology of gender course. So when it's my turn to teach it, she always comes to give a guest lecture for me. When it's her turn, I go to give a guest lecture for her. So I go to give a guest lecture in her class, 300 students in the room. And as I walk in the door, one of the students looks up and says, "Oh, finally, an objective opinion." All that semester, every time my colleague opened her mouth, what my students saw and heard was a woman. Shirley, if you were to stand up in front of my students and say, there is structural inequality based on gender in the United States, they would say, well, of course you'd say that. You're a woman. You're biased. When I say it, they go, wow, that's interesting. Is that going to be on the test? How do you spell structural? So I want you to know, I hope you all in the back can see this. This is what objectivity looks like. Disembodied Western rationality? Here I am. Which is why I wear a tie. Because I think if you are going to embody disembodied Western rationality, you need a signifier. You need some way to identify that you represent objectivity. And what better signifier could I possibly come up with than a garment that at one end is a noose and the other end points to the genitals? Let me put it this way. This here is mind-body dualism, the hallmark of Western rationality. So this is what objectivity looks like. I would invite the women in the room to reflect on times that they've had conversations, arguments, discussions with a man who said, well, wait, let's look at this objectively. The translation, I suppose, from Martian to Venusian is, let's look at this from my point of view. Let me give you another example of how privilege is invisible to those who have it, that has nothing to do with gender at all. You all have email addresses, middlebury.edu. How many of you have ever written an email to someone in a university in another country? What do you notice about their email addresses that are different from ours? That's right. That's right. Every other country, including universities, has a country code at the end. You want to write to somebody at a university in Britain? .ac for academic, .uk. Want to write to somebody at a university in Australia? .edu, .au. Have you ever asked yourself how come the United States is the only country that doesn't have a country code at the end of its email addresses? Hint, it is not because Al Gore invented the internet. It is because when you are the dominant power in the world, every other country is marked, every other country is labeled, every other country is other. Privilege is invisible to those who have it, even when we write an email. Let me put it this way. Only an American could write a song with the title, We Are the World. Think a little bit with me about what the consequences of this invisibility are. Let's just take one field. Let's take economics for a minute. We talk in economics about the feminization of poverty. Why don't we talk about the masculinization of wealth? When we talk about wage differentials, we always talk about women's wages as a function of men's wages. Women earn 76 cents to every man's dollar. Why don't we say men earn $1.32 for every dollar a woman earns? Because privilege is invisible. We see the discrimination, we don't see the privilege. We get a bonus just for having a Y chromosome. Why is this so important? Remember that first rule of manhood. No sissy stuff. Because without making gender visible, without enabling young boys particularly to feel safe, confident, and secure in their masculinity, we invent all kinds of ways to prove it all the time. It is a constant fear that we will be seen as sissies, as gay. Every guy in here knows that the most common put down in middle schools and high schools in America today is, "That's so gay." And we also know that "that's so gay" is not necessarily about sexual orientation, but about gender. If I say, "That necklace is so gay," I am not saying, "I believe you may have erotic interest in members of your gender." I'm saying, it's not masculine enough. And you would know the code, right? Everybody would. Well, just listen to the words of my favorite gender theorist, Eminem.